Hello, my name is Holly Hughes, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at BAI. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar sponsored by Alkami, Winning the SMB Lending Battle. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to review just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have any difficulties on your end today, please know that a recording of the webinar will be sent out to view on demand. And if any disruption happens on our end, we'll work to resolve it as quickly as possible and appreciate your patience. We will be using the polling feature during today's webinar. Note that you will not see the polling question if you are viewing the module in the full screen mode, so we ask that you minimize the module so that you can go ahead and participate in that poll when it comes up. And we'll conclude this webinar with a question and answer period. So at any time during the conversation, please go ahead and type a question in that Q&A box on your screen, and we'll be answering those questions today as well. And then also at the end of today's webinar, you'll see an online evaluation on your screen. Your feedback is really important to BAI as we strive to address the key issues that are impacting the industry, especially in today's unique business environment. So we do ask that you take a couple minutes and complete that survey when you see it appear. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in with a little bit of background on the topic today. So according to the U.S. Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy, there are over 32.5 million small businesses in the U.S. As SMBs look to expand their operations, how do you make sure that you meet or exceed their expectations to maintain a primary relationship with these customers? I have the pleasure of speaking with Har Rai Khalsa, VP and General Manager of Digital Account Opening and Loan Origination at Alkami, to discuss how you can make loans more accessible to SMBs, as well as better compete with neobanks and fintechs who are capturing SMB market share. Har Rai brings over 14 years of lending and fintech experience in helping financial institutions digitally acquire customers, use rule-based decisioning to mitigate risk, and compete with megabanks. He was the co-founder and CEO of MK Decision before the company was acquired by Alkami in September of 21. So welcome, Har Rai. It's great to have you with us today. I thought we could go ahead and get started by polling the audience and just getting a read on the latest challenges that they're seeing in this space. So if we want to go ahead and bring that poll up. So the question that we wanted to ask you is, what is your organization's biggest challenge when it comes to SMB lending? And you see a couple options there: introducing a digital channel for loan applications, improving your user experience, streamlining underwriting processes, and growing your online business banking program. So it looks like it's neck and neck, Har Rai, between maybe pulling ahead is introducing the digital channel for loan applications and then streamlining underwriting. So thank you. We can go ahead and remove that. Does that surprise you, Har Rai, or is that similar to what you've seen in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, and thank you all so much for joining Holly and I today. I mean, certainly we would not be in business if people were not interested in improving the onboarding experience and decisioning. I mean, that's pretty much end-to-end loan origination. So Holly, from our perspective, as we look at the industry and we see the type of lending products that financial institutions are bringing directly to their consumer or small business, there's a lot of challenges, and we have to adapt quickly in order to keep up with the fintechs who are innovating completely on experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about a number of those, challenges throughout the conversation. And I think maybe also just to level set, Har Rai, talking about, we've done some research in this area. We do an outlook for the new year. So we did a 2022 outlook, and we asked leaders about, what are your top business challenges? And loan growth came up as the #2 business challenge for financial services leaders, with #1 being improving the digital customer experience, which certainly correlates in this area too. Would love to, get your view on, the demand for business loans in 2022 and what you think that's going to be looking like.
Yeah, in really preparing for today's call, I think that what took place in the last year or two with paycheck protection loans, disaster recovery loans, it's almost like the opium of the masses in terms of government funding being pushed out to small businesses across the country. But the biggest challenge that we're seeing with the SMBs is now that I've literally received seed or Series A funding from the government, I'm addicted to that type of funding coming through my enterprise. But it's also coupled with some challenges in terms of revenue generation for the small business. you still have different government mandates that are challenging and putting some pressure on different sectors of business. We've definitely seen technology sector and people who are able to adapt and innovate within the pandemic circumstances thrive and earn market share. But for your average Main Street businesses, it's becoming more and more clear that what's going on in Wall Street and what's going on Main Street are very far from each other.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned the PPP program. Many, I think, BAI, we do a number of executive roundtables, and we actually had a roundtable for leaders that were in charge of PPP for their organization. So we had a front row seat to how everyone was, trying to manage through that, which was definitely a challenge. And, many organizations were forced to implement new technology to support that program. So another question for you, how can leaders continue to build on the user experience improvements that were made during PPP? And, where do you think that they should be focused?
It's a great question, Holly. And, as I think back to those early days in March of 2020, I had different vendors calling me left and right. Har Rai, are you going to spin up a PPP onboarding experience? And it was just not the right time and place for our product and engineering teams because of our commitments across account opening, credit card, and unsecured loan origination. But what I did see was one of my really good friends, Joe Earhart and Tesla, really took that on head and went after the PPP market directly. We saw the Street Shares platform out of Washington, D.C. do a lot of work to attack that PPP sector. But one of the other reasons we decided we weren't ready to focus on PPP onboarding and decisioning was because it was a program that we didn't see as a long-term government-infused and supported program. We saw it more as a disaster recovery program or economic relief program. So the lifeline of 1 to 2 years of distributing this product wasn't as viable for us to invest, the couple $1 million it would take to truly handle that type of PPP program with our other commitments. So what I would say in terms of what's going on with the demand post government stimulus is that, these businesses, I think about 11% increase in declinations we saw from small businesses trying to apply for loans from fintechs and regular financial institutions. So as the PPP and the EIDL loans were going out to market quickly and the SBA was earning all of this strong assets from the marketplace, we were also seeing that the approval ratings from traditional lenders was going down for traditional business loans. So I think that we're going to see a dramatic shift in demand. It's a little hard for me to predict how coming out of an unprecedented event like PPP and EIDL is truly going to impact small businesses and their behavior of looking for new business loans. But in terms of this demand, I would not be surprised at all to see the mega banks continue to purchase and acquire fintech lenders in this SMB space, as we've already seen with Cabbage and Bluevine.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be interesting to see how that does evolve and continue there. Anything else that you would note about, that user experience or just kind of, so you talked about overall trends, anything else more specific to maybe pieces of the process that leaders are focused on or you recommend that they focus on?
Yeah, unfortunately, one of the challenge of rushing anything in life, and especially technology, is that when you try to get to market so fast, like many of the financial institutions on this call did with PPP programs, sometimes you're sacrificing the form or the look and feel of your product in favor of function. And me and my brother have an age-old debate. He's the functional one, and I'm the form one. So we balance each other quite nicely. But what I would say is that a lot of the PPP onboarding experiences and loan processing experiences have been fraught with issues around user experience. A lot of times that onboarding journey is not as intuitive as it could have been because it was rushed to market. So there wasn't as much time, preparation, prototyping, piloting, et cetera, that was done. These functional products were really ushered to market to respond to this disaster. So what I would say is, as we look at the different portals for processing requirements, as we look for the different data integrations that could be used to streamline that application and decisioning process, those are really the efforts that need to be made post-PPP, because many of the PPP processes were very kind of mundane application experiences where you weren't able to link external bank accounts for cash flow analysis or link your payroll provider in order to bring in your P&L and your balance sheet for underwriting. So it was very manual, to say the least, Holly.
Yeah, definitely. And, next, question I wanted to ask you is a little bit more around the fintech trends, because certainly, traditional banks are seeing a lot of pressure there. There's a number of fintech trends that are bleeding from retail over to business experience. What trends in that space do you think leaders should be most focused on to remain competitive?
Well, certainly what we've seen with the fintechs is moving the application experience towards minimal field inputs per screen. And I think it has to do with dopamine being secreted by our glandular system when we move through a step and feel a sense of completion. So for me, gone are the days of 12 to 15 fields per screen. Gone are the days of application experiences where you say this will only take 25 minutes. And I've seen that, Holly, recently on very large financial institutions' websites. This is only going to take 25 minutes, this process. So I would say that with the consumer experience driving innovation always, you're going to see the kind of the bleeding edge of onboarding influenced by the Chimes of the world. You've seen Capital One come out with some outstanding new onboarding experiences. That's going to continue to bleed into the expectation on the business side. So as people are designing and building business products, definitely looking at how can I still maintain that strong risk, compliance, and fraud prevention mindset, but not really building my product from that exclusively. And I think that's where both the digital channels leaders at the financial institution and the compliance leaders have to come together, really see it as a teeter-totter. When user experience tends to go up and improve, sometimes the fear is that compliance and fraud mitigation will go down. So ensuring that you have the right balance as you're building your new business flows. I do think every organization is in a mindset where post-PPP EIDL, we all know that we're going to see an influx of demand because once you start sending millions of dollars to small businesses and they deploy it to keep their current staff, when that's met with decreased revenues and challenge to get labor force participation, you're going to have those same businesses coming back looking for more. But this time, they're not going to be able to get it from the government. So they're going to be looking to their traditional financial institution. Holly, we were discussing before this, the amazing statistic that 80% of the small businesses that took out loans at community banks had existing relationships. So being very close friends with the ICBA, seeing how hard they champion to get programs out to market for PPP, now it's what comes next. And we're in this age of digital transformation where what comes next is being driven by the consumer expectation. Even though they are a small business owner, they still are consumers in their own right and will have that expectation for speed and automation.
Yeah, I love what you said about balance and, looking at risk, looking at compliance, keeping the user experience in mind, and probably draws to your affinity for form and how that comes across. There are certainly different ways to execute that, and opportunities for improvement. Har Rai, what other competitive threats do you think leaders need to be watching out for in this area right now?
Yeah, it's always challenging. We always want to understand our threats or enemies just as well as we understand ourselves if we're on a path to victory. But what I would say is that the biggest threat right now is not innovating in the onboarding and decisioning process. We can't afford to do what we've always done. Many financial institutions are still taking paper applications. They may have done a lot of work, Holly, to improve their business banking offerings, but without actual onboarding and decisioning offerings wrapped around digital banking, the old call the business into the office or go out to their office and complete the application is still going to be in play. So I would say that if we don't quickly adapt to the digital channel, both for net new businesses wanting to create relationships with us and really not just see the application and decisioning as the entire process. It's gone much further now, Holly. It's application, it's decisioning, and it's actual use of business banking. So if you think of that entire process from your website through to this small business now having an access to your online banking, that has to be optimized. And then secondly, when you take that stat I mentioned earlier, 80% of businesses with community banks applying for PPP at community banks, those are existing customers of yours. So they're going to be met with ideally authenticated experiences to apply for your products within digital banking itself. And so I think that for the innovators, product developers on this call, all of whom I'm very esteemed to be on with today, I would say that don't just look at your net new business acquisition strategy. Here at Alkami, we have some fantastic product managers, some of whom came from Capital One and worked closely with Bluevine. They actually started with authenticated user experiences to make that application for a new business loan as seamless as possible. They're already authenticated. We know who they are and that they are who they say they are. We have a lot of their existing data within digital banking itself. How do we make them truly feel like we know who they are inside of digital banking, even though they're applying for a new product? So I think that is a mouthful, Holly, but I hope helpful to the team here.
Yeah, definitely some really good points, especially that leveraging of existing data, because I think, we're all consumers too, and I think we see that as we're interacting with different types of organizations. So finding ways to get that collaboration, that synergy within the organization can really have a powerful impact on that user experience. So, again, just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the Q&A box, and we'll get to those in just a minute here. But Har Rai, maybe last formal question, then we'll go into some Q&A. Any final thoughts on, you've given people a lot of great things, I think, to consider. Anything else that you would add on how banks and credit unions can win this SMB lending battle?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the age of big data, and we're seeing the mega tech companies move into financial services faster than ever, leveraging the power of data that they have at their disposal to do so. So as we all think about ways that we can reduce friction to the consumer while still keeping that great risk and compliance hat on, you have to be looking at things like external bank account links. If you're doing any type of, where do you want me to put your funds? Link your external bank account and I'll put it right in there. Ensure that the routing number, the account number are accurate so you don't send funding to a small business, but it bounces on you and ends up being costly, time-consuming, frustrating when those NACHA files don't process correctly. I would definitely say that accounting package links are becoming something of the norm. If your risk team and your credit team don't see the P&L and the balance sheet coming out of the accounting package, QuickBooks, Xero, et cetera, as viable or audited, and you'd prefer some type of tax return and traditionally want to spread it, there's a lot of vendors out there who have great products. Flash Spread comes to mind. My good friend Ariel over there. Basically upload a PDF of your tax return, whether it's straight from the IRS or whether it's scanned from the business itself, and they're going to spread all of the data on that tax return and help you actually underwrite it in real time. So definitely looking for ways that either you can pull in external data for underwriting, pull over external data for funding, and then all told, Holly, if you can do your customer identification through non-documentary means, that's always advisable. I was applying for an account with probably one of the financial institutions on here today, and they requested me to upload my driver's license, and I know they probably had some scan technology behind the scenes, but it kept darn erroring on me, Holly, and I can tell you that when I was adding all of the beneficial owners on my entity, this is when I was still a founder before the acquisition, I ultimately just said, I'm the only beneficial owner on this application. Nobody else is a beneficial owner because I can't even get my own ID to upload correctly. So we've been very aggressive in moving towards non-documentary means of identification, whether that's through the great providers' ideology, Secure, or the Alloys of the world.
Yeah, the struggle is real when we experience ourselves transacting. Har Rai, we did get a question coming in just to follow up on what you just spoke about, asking, could you repeat the name of the company that will spread the tax return information?
Absolutely. They were recently acquired by, I think, Be Smarty, but don't hold me to that. It was Flash Spread, and Ariel is a good friend of mine. There's also another company that was recently acquired by Numerated called Fincera. I haven't seen their product, but yeah, those are two spread, tax return spread companies. They have a whole host of different documents that they can spread for you. But you think about that power of being able to upload a PDF of a tax return and then pull the actual data points off that tax return and start underwriting with them. That's not the future, that's the present. And these companies are getting acquired by the day, Holly. So, definitely being conscious of how you're able to leverage that sooner than later.
Very good. So a couple more questions. Well, we've got about 8 minutes left, it looks like. So question, how can financial FIs make loans more accessible to small businesses? Yeah,
I mean, certainly when you think about traditional financial institutions, you're in the relationship business, and we have a famous saying, you want to give that high tech but also high touch feel to your small businesses, because ultimately they're going to be consumer accounts for you all as well. If you're really doing a great job, they're not just going to have their business with you, but potentially they either started as a consumer and then opened a business account with you, or vice versa. So I would say that when you look for how am I going to grow my business portfolio, you have to say, who am I truly competing with? And I always encourage local financial institutions not to compete with their neighbors on Main Street, but to look at the Cabbages, the OnDecks, the Blue Vines of the world, these fintechs who are now getting purchased by the megabanks, and say, what type of experience are they trying to give to the small business? And I think that when we talk about experience, there's some synonyms that we use in product development. We say journey, or we say story. And ultimately, I think that the journey that you take them on through the onboarding is one that's going to create a lasting impression. It's either going to be memorable or forgettable. If it's memorable, then you get that 1 to 10 referral ratio. If it's forgettable, then the 10 businesses you could have won, you're certainly going to lose them, and maybe more than that. So definitely looking at the experience of onboarding and realizing that relationship lending is now digital, and your website has to be able to deliver on your internal brand, your culture, your relationship, the story of your institution, the voice of your institution should be able to be heard through that onboarding and decisioning process. So definitely permeating and infusing your brand and culture into the experience to apply for your products.
Very good. And then one final question, and as we're going into this last question, we'll go ahead and bring up the survey. And again, those folks dialed in today, if you could just take a couple minutes to fill that out, that would be very appreciated. But final question, you talked a lot about onboarding. A question came in about how about underwriting and, easing that process, simplifying that process? Any thoughts or recommendations you have for the group about underwriting improvements?
Yeah, so as all of you can imagine, it's a huge task, Alkami acquiring MK Decision and then basically saying we need full suite retail onboarding and business onboarding into our core digital banking products. So what I would say about onboarding is that's where you can do a lot of the decisioning is in the onboarding experience. So from an identity verification perspective, every single screen that the consumer is going through in the application process should have some type of decisioning that you're doing. So say the first screen, give me your name and email. Well, let's do an email address check. Let's go out, do an API call. How old is that email address? If it's opened within the last 30 days, TransUnion is going to tell us that the likelihood that that is a fraudulent email is extremely high. If our next screen is grabbing a phone number to do two-factor authentication, long gone are the days of out-of-wallet questions. To those of you who still have them in market, you probably understand the challenges that we're trying to move through as well. But doing two-factor SMS verification via cell phone gives you a lot of telecommunications data. We can determine that the person actually owns and has the device in their hand. And then from there, typically what we're looking at in the unsecured business lending space, we're actually underwriting off of personal guarantees and the principals. So we're still pulling credit on the principals. If they pass our identity checks, we go out, we pull credit. We're also doing the biz checks profile from check systems, and then we're pulling in biz ID from TransUnion. So we're leveraging some of the newer scores that the bureaus are giving us on businesses. We're looking at their tax lien status, looking at their DTI from the bureaus. And then all told, if it's a heavier secured type loan, then we would probably request some of the bank statements or tax returns. And then in those cases, the goal is definitely that you're allowing them the interface to upload those bank statements, and then they're spread for you in the back office. That's where our roadmap is going. And then also with external bank account links, if you're actually able to bring in their income and their expenses from the bank account itself, you can triangulate somebody based off their identity, their bank account data that you can pull in. And that's not just one benefit, Holly. That's going to give you routing and account number for funding. That's going to give you personally identifiable information that's on the bank account itself. That's going to give you income and expense data so you can do cash flow underwriting on this business itself. And then finally, external accounting package links to pull P&L and balance sheet directly out and then decision off of it. Now, the thresholds and the parameters, I'm going to leave it to you all. You have your own risk policy and your guidelines that your credit officers are going to put in front of you. But taking those elements and saying, how can I leverage those different integration points and fantastic fintech products to reduce the onboarding burden and friction, but still keep up the strong risk and compliance approach?
Well, I think great place to end. Har Rai, thank you so much. You know, you've given everyone, I think, a lot of really, really valuable insights to think about. Such an important area, important growth opportunity in 2022 and beyond. And thanks to all of you for joining. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. As a follow-up to today's session, you'll receive an email from BAI within 24 hours that will include a link to this webinar recording. We encourage you to share the link with your team or other peers who might benefit from the insights shared today, because certainly it's a lot of collaboration within your organization to make this all happen. And you can learn more about BAI and find other relevant content and actionable insights, such as the BAI Banking Strategies podcast on our website, which is bai.org. So this concludes our session for today. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.